Now we're back to 50 years ago in the story of Apollo, but looked at from the perspective of 50 years. And to kick off this afternoon's history discussion, we've got Professor John Logsdon, Professor Emeritus from George Washington University, in fact the founder of the famous Space Policy Institute at George Washington University. Since he's retired and gone to emeritus status, John's been extremely prolific in writing some great works. If you haven't read his three latest books, they're all award winners, and he'll mention some of them in his discussion here, but without further ado, let me introduce Professor John Logsdon.
Go with Anka.
Where's she? Where's she go? Oh,
I should say, by the way, that I'm moderating a conversation with Dr. Aldrin at the Highlights Lecture Thursday late afternoon, and intend to give him a chance to do more on his ideas of the future. So there will be other opportunities. But today the question is, how did this happen? Most of you in this room probably know most of this history, so this is kind of a reminder of how we did this. I mean, when we're now talking, as Buzz suggests, with an SLS launch, if it ever happens, once every 2 years, between December 1968 and December 1972, we launched 9 Apollo missions to the moon. 3 or 4 month centers at the start. 12 people, 12 Americans, 12 American males walked on the moon, and then we left. December 14, 1972, Apollo 17 took off from the surface of the moon. The White House issued a statement in the name of President Nixon saying, this may well be the last time in this century that people walk on the surface of the moon. And unfortunately, Nixon was right. We haven't been back since. Why did that happen? So that's what I want to talk about. Why did we go? Why did we stop? I've written 2 books, and this material is extracted from those books. So that's the only commercial we have here. There is a lot of mythology about the Apollo program. Like it was invented over a weekend following the launch of Yuri Gagarin. Not true. NASA, within a year of its origin in October of 1958, had decided to set sending humans to the moon as the long-term goal of its human spaceflight. Began the planning. In August of 1960, announced a new program called Apollo with a 3-person capsule. I guess I should say 3-man capsule at that point. And that not yet to go to the moon, but to do long-duration Earth orbital and circumlunar flight. President Eisenhower was briefed on this and said, are you nuts? We've no intention for me to approve anything like that. Well, he only had a month left in the White House, so what he thought was kind of irrelevant. But it wasn't clear as John Kennedy became president on Buzz's birthday, January the 20th, 1961, also my wedding anniversary. What Kennedy would do with the space program. He had not thought very much about it prior to entering the White House. And when he was first presented with the idea of accelerating the program and having a post-Mercury human spaceflight program called Apollo, he said, I'm not ready to make that decision. Then came Gagarin, April the 12th, 61. And from the U.S. point of view, it was the kind of second strike in the contest for space dominance with the Soviet Union. Sputnik being first and Gagarin being second. John Kennedy was an extremely competitive person. This was not acceptable to him. And he came to the conclusion looking at both the domestic and particularly the international reaction to the Gagarin flight, that the United States could not afford to just step aside and yield this new domain to the Soviet Union, to our erstwhile Cold War rival. A few days later, he wrote a classic memo, just one page, but this is the charter of Apollo. And in that memo, the first paragraph, do we have a chance of beating the Soviets? Is there any space program which promises dramatic results in which we could win? It's a pretty clear set of requirements. Space, dramatic, win. He asked Lyndon Johnson, his vice president, to conduct a rapid review to answer those questions, and the answer came back, go to the moon. Why? In addition to the fact that the moon was there, it was the first dramatic achievement that would require the Soviet Union to build a new rocket. Its existing rocket that was used for Sputnik and Gagarin was not powerful enough for a lunar landing mission. When Wernher von Braun was brought in to consult with the vice president, and he said, both sides will have to build a new rocket, and you've got me, and they don't. Dr. von Braun was not modest, but he was also right. And in fact, at one level, Apollo was a rocket-building race, which the United States clearly won. The political rationale came in a memo signed by NASA Administrator Webb, Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara, approved by the Vice President, that went to Kennedy on May 8, 1961, saying it's men, not merely machines, that captures the imagination of the world, and that large-scale projects aimed at national prestige are part of the battle along the fluid front of the Cold War. It's not much about space exploration in this. This is not what Apollo was about. Apollo was about, as Buzz said a few minutes ago, leadership, winning a competition in the environment of the Cold War. You've all seen this, but it's worth seeing it again, if it works.
The dramatic achievement in space which occurred in recent weeks should have made clear to us all, as did the Sputnik in 1957, the impact of this adventure on the minds of men everywhere who are attempting to make a determination of which road they should take. I believe that this nation should commit itself to achieving a goal before this decade is out of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the earth. No single space project in this period will be more impressive to mankind or more important for the long-range exploration of space.
One thing that drives me crazy as a historian is that are the people that claim that Kennedy announced the decision to go to the moon in Houston a year and a half later, in September of 1962. Even the piece of paper that comes with your backpack or your tote bag for this meeting makes that claim. And obviously it's not true, but people in Houston don't want to agree with that. But Kennedy not only said the words, he backed up the words in ways that no subsequent president has ever done with action. Again, Buzz says we need action. Well, this was a warlike but peaceful mobilization of human and financial resources, more or less unparalleled in peacetime in the United States. 89% NASA increase the first year and 101% the next year. A massive investment in construction of facilities, a doubling of the size of NASA and quadrupling of the contractor workforce. When people say, let's do another Apollo again, they kind of forget what was involved. They also, there is another, I think, kind of misapprehension, which is Kennedy got up in May of 61, said, let's go to the moon. In July of 1969, we did it, and it was kind of a smooth path in between. Of course, not true. Kennedy did go to Houston after visiting Huntsville and the Cape in September of 62 because he wanted to revisit the decision and see whether he really meant it. And he wanted to see the progress that was being made. And he made this famous address at Rice University during that trip.
Many years ago, the great British explorer George Mallory, who was to die on Mount Everest, was asked why did he want to climb it. He said because it is there. Well, space is there, and we're going to climb it. And the moon and the planets are there, and new hopes for knowledge and peace are there. And therefore, as we set sail, we ask God's blessing on the most hazardous and dangerous and greatest adventure on which man has ever embarked.
I like giving this talk because I like listening to Kennedy speak and everybody else. Why did John Kennedy make this commitment? I think it was fundamentally a leadership decision. He came to the conclusion that leadership in space was essential to U.S. global leadership in the world after World War II. We had assumed this country the traditional role of the United Kingdom of Great Britain as a global kind of manager of affairs. And the Soviet Union at that point was our major opponent. There's this quote in a tape-recorded meeting with Kennedy and his advisors in November of 1962. The Soviet Union has made this space leadership a test of the system. Everything we ought to do ought to really be tied to getting onto the moon ahead of the Russians. It's pretty straightforward. There was, in '63, some serious question of the wisdom of the commitment. The Republican side said, our problem is the Soviet Union in low Earth orbit. Why are we worried about beating them to the moon? The program was at that time not in very healthy condition. It was behind schedule. Rather nasty debate on the choice of how to get to the moon. The Congress had lost some of its enthusiasm and was ready to cut the budget by 10%. Kennedy was concerned about the impact of his commitment on his re-election prospects in 1964. And he recognized the world had changed after the Cuban Missile Crisis, and that maybe there were other ways to go rather than competition. Again, when I show this next clip, people say, I didn't know that. You should know it. Kennedy had thought about cooperating with the Soviet Union from his first day in office. In his inaugural address, he said, let us explore the stars together. But again, in September 20th, 1963, 2 months before he was killed, Kennedy went to the UN.
Finally, in a field where the United States and the Soviet Union have a special capacity, in the field of space, there is room for new cooperation, for further joint efforts in the regulation and exploration of space. I include among these possibilities a joint expedition to the moon.
It's interesting to speculate. What if rapidly Khrushchev had said yes to that proposition? His son and Sergei has said over several times in subsequent years that he was ready to say yes, but no positive response came while Kennedy was alive. NASA management, Lyndon Johnson, didn't favor the cooperative approach, and so with Kennedy's death, the idea of cooperation disappeared. The reality was at that point we were racing only ourselves. The Soviet Union had not yet made a decision to send humans to the moon, send cosmonauts to the moon. That decision was not made until August of '64, and then poorly executed. So, what was happening at the end of Kennedy's presidency? There was a major review, and of all people, the predecessor of OMB, then called the Bureau of the Budget, said there's no reason to change, we can afford it. I don't think our OMB these days would say the same thing. Kennedy made a visit to Cape Canaveral on November the 16th, 63. He was briefed on Apollo's plans. He was briefed on an upcoming Saturn I launch by Werner von Braun and came away very enthusiastic. 6 days later, unfortunately, he fell victim to an assassin's bullet. I think that's the final thing that made Apollo possible, was Kennedy's death. It became a memorial to a fallen young president. And there was really no debate about canceling Apollo in subsequent years, even after the Apollo 1 fire. So the program went forward with Gemini, with, I think, a mission almost as historically significant as 11, which was Apollo 8. Then on July the 16th, 69, that's Apollo 11 taking off. Buzz had a better seat, but I'm in the circle there. I was there too. Some things you don't forget in life. So we went, we landed. We went again with Apollo 12 in November and the subsequent missions, and then we stopped. Why? Well, some of the people in NASA were very worried about the level of risk involved and said, President Kennedy said, get to the moon and back before this decade's out. We've done that. Let's not continue going and risk killing people. And so NASA proposed in 1970 canceling 2 of the remaining missions. But also Nixon himself, particularly after Apollo 13, got very worried about the possibility of a major accident. He tried to cancel 16 and 17 and was talked out of it. He didn't want any of those missions, either 16 or 17, that happened close to his re-election. And so 17, if you remember, was December of 72, after the election. Saturn V production was quickly canceled, giving up the capability to continue any kind of post-Apollo mission, including the Mars missions that NASA had proposed. And we left. I'll show this again because it's fun to see the takeoff.
Sit down, kid. I'll get the pro. Proceeded. 3, 2, 1. Ignition. Burn away, Houston. Vector good. Back side.
That ride looks like fun. I'll ask Buzz. Now we're 50 years behind all of this. We have a program to return to the moon. Will we hear at some point?
We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other thing, not because they are easy, but because they are hard. Because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills. Because that challenge is one that we're willing to accept, one we are willing to postpone, and one we intend to win, and the other two.
Well, we'll see. Thank you all.
Thanks, Scott. That was great.